jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show.
Join us as we cover many an insane movie and numerous cult TV phenomenons. Are you ready to get jacked up? Are you with us? Then listen on.
Listener discretion is advised. It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show.
Welcome. Here we are once again. Film Strips, Jay Skipworth.
What's
Song
up,
four.
man? What's up? Thanks for having me back on, man.
Anytime we had previously discussed Clint Eastwood's just moody and yet charismatic resume, politics free, and we had out of all the franchises, I always schedule them like independently just because there's always just a no-show or schedule, conflict, and I just said, okay, surely someone wants, everyone's covered Beverly Hills Cop a million times, and it never gets old. It's an entertaining movie, but I haven't seen too many people cover 48 Hours. So how about we just do, just contrast and, compare these two Eddie Murphy franchises, because they're best cited as like the earliest regeneration of the 80s buddy formula. Jay, thank you so much for just making time for this.
Oh, man. Yeah. Heck yeah. I mean, these, you're talking about back when Paramount was heavy in its dramatic, gritty action comedy phase, and it would blur the lines on what those things meant from time to time. But both of these franchises approach that from different perspectives, and it's fun to go back and look at them again, because it had been a long time. Oddly enough, of all the things we've covered on Film Strip, neither of these franchises have come up in the queue up to this point. There's always time, but 11 years in, eventually we'll get to everything, but we haven't gotten to these, and
they weren't easy to introduce people to, because my folks, they were strict. They're like, okay, if it's on TV, that we can watch it, but they are R-rated for language, so colorful stuff, and it was one of those. I always respected 48 Hours, but I had seen it in the worst possible way, just cut up. You cannot make out half the dialogue if you bleep it all, and it's just so funny. I mean, I revisited them on El Rey Network before they took down that channel, but I mean, I'd always had some kind of respect for it, and I was already a Walter Hill fan. Who isn't? He just was a master of just doing very fascinating character studies and just making everything be a neo-Western,
Yeah, everything's a Western with him. People can go on Film Strip, and one of our more fun reviews in the last couple of years was Streets of Fire, which was a complete bomb for him, but now has this incredible cult following that it totally deserves, by the way.
Yeah, much like Blade Runner, everyone cites it as like one of their top 100 movies, and it's like, but you realized it tanked. And
it's like the way John Carpenter talks about The Thing. He's like, I appreciate the fact that everybody likes that now, but where the hell were all of you in 1981, because that lost me a job.
Yeah.
that fault.
They're talking. I've seen many TV show actors do that. It's like, we won all the Emmys, and yet I never had anyone stop me on the street say, I love you on the 6 o'clock show, can't wait. And it is funny how it just goes in stages, and you just don't know if it really was just because of limitations of before phones took off and everyone just had pagers, or internet really being that inspirational. It's definitely something everyone stumbles over, is like, where do you really know me from?
Right, exactly. I mean, and you think about like 48 Hours, like without 48 Hours, you don't have things like Bad Boys and even like Lethal Weapon and
and Steven Souza. I mean, this is totally his blueprint for Ricochet and the Die Hard movies. And
yes, Ricochet, by the way, that's one people need to go back for that, because John Lithgow in the 90s would play like these incredibly over the top villains. Like that one and Cliffhanger are two just morsels of him just being an actor in this huge piece of shit movie. But it is fun to watch. Ricochet is hilarious, and that's some good Denzel and Ice-T.
It's even in the same universe as Die Hard.
Yes.
It's got the same reporter. So
yep, all in the same place. Yes.
Typical Joel Silver. But so yeah, Joel Silver was just a co-producer. He was working with, Lawrence Gordon, and who was best known for doing a lot of the other productions with Silver, as well as Laura Croft, and even creating Matt Houston of all things and Field of Dreams. So, I mean, there's so basically everybody just took off with this. It's like, I had known about Roger Spottiswoode, Tomorrow Never Dies, and he worked with Nolte on Under Fire, the war movie. But yeah, it's like he was one of the co-writers, and Larry Gross was the only one he was one of the free writers. I always forgot his name, but he had worked with, unlike you say, Streets of Fire with Hill, and with Eastwood on True Crime and Crime and Punishment in Suburbia. So, I mean, again, everybody's literally just taken off. Everybody is pretty much given their best material for this movie.
Yeah, and I mean, you're looking at Eddie Murphy again. This is a vehicle for him, obviously, but you pair.
They were both TV actors. Yeah.
Nolte has been this 70s TV guy, and had really kind of been in that sort of heartthrobby kind of stuff. So him to play a gritty cop, he's kind of a caricature now because his voice is so gravelly and everything.
In his drunk business, but yeah, I mean,
right. But like now, it's a. I mean, you see sort of the beginnings of that, and kind of I think the other thing too that I always appreciated about this is, and this is a movie that doesn't get made anymore, man, is that he doesn't look like some GQ model. He looks like a schlub that smokes and drinks too much and eats bad food because he's on stakeouts all night. And like that's
1,000%. And the cast is lovely. I mean, and it's so fun seeing Jonathan Banks, who we'll get here to in a minute, as one of the cops. He's the main bad guy in Beverly Hills Cop, or secondary at least.
Yeah. Well, then you've also got Sonny Landham and James Remar, who are just again known for playing heavies or tough guys, bad guys.
Denise Crosby before Pet Sematary and Star Trek. So
right, you got Annette O'Toole in this
and
too.
Is lovely here. But yeah, Remar, I definitely associate with him. I just would always recognize him. Hey, that guy is always the bad guy or the dad.
He's either that. He's the jerk neighbor that wants you to get off his lawn, or he's the drug dealer.
Yeah, always the drug dealer, or or the scumbag who's been framed or something. He's always had an interesting arc, and it's just so hysterical how I would always just try and rediscover some of his casual, low budget, revenge or psycho thriller movies. But yeah, I mean, this was years before he kind of started doing a lot of TV stuff like Jericho and Dexter. And I'm like,
right, he was Sex and the City. You see him show up on that, and you're like, okay,
yeah, Mr. Swab. He must have dyed his hair really good. He's
right. Well, I mean, but you can even see him. I mean, he was in that remake of Miracle on 34th Street, for goodness sakes. Like, all the people sticking this, like Ajax from the Warriors. Okay, but
and that's a good. I'm glad you made that contrast. Yeah, this is like his pretty much his cameo in the bar fight of Long Riders, and pretty much definitely the Warriors. His breakout role is why he's in this.
Another Walter Hill, by the way. That's a great flick. That one I think everybody holds that one in great regard, and for good reason again. But 48 Hours is it's an interesting balance between being this very gritty action, sort of urban action movie, and a vehicle for Eddie Murphy to do his stuff. And it's before Eddie Murphy had the clout to basically take over production and ruin it, by just doing too much of the stand-up stuff.
We talked about his dodgy career, and I mean, Metro is probably as close as he ever even remotely gets to trying to revisit this. But
we're gonna talk about Metro, because I've often called Metro the better version of Beverly Hills Cop 3, but we'll get there.
You're not alone. My pal, my co-host John is the same way. He's like, he can't do a frame of that, but he can do Metro, and
But no, 48 Hours is the original 48 Hours is the gritty It's dirty. The city's dirty. It's not afraid
Even
to
the way
show
it's
all
lit,
that.
it's just as dirty, and you can totally understand how Rick Waite got assigned by Stallone to basically do his version of what was originally the rejected version of 48 Hours or Beverly Hills Cop with Cobra. Is like he knew how to paint the skies and
Marion Cobretti, that another very fun film strip episode Ron and I did many years ago now. But Cobra lives in the same universe as Beverly Hills Cop, but it's just a different part of California. And actually it's in the Dirty Harry universe too, because just as an aside real quick, the Rini Santoni that plays the partner in Cobra is the original Dirty Harry partner. And we just sort of made the joke that like, he just keeps getting shot in the leg.
Never thought of that.
And teamed up with these psychos, and all he's trying to do is just make it to retirement.
I thought of it just because of Andrew Robinson being the captain after being the Scorpio killer. But
that also, like, his brother was a killer. Yeah, I totally get that. Yes, like,
that's even funnier. I never thought of the partner, but yeah, that's true. He's in both those as the hard-boiled detective. And he has ironically more screen time apparently in the TV version, which better version of the movie that should have been listed.
Oh yeah, that movie got, you talk about something, the MPA. We were talking about that offline. Just cut to hell and back.
Well, it was also
Cobra, but
see Stallone's not in. He cut out as well. So
because look, it's my vehicle. I took the book that it was written, and I just basically said like, look, I'm just gonna put my name on the book and re-release it. Is that okay? So
now you're making me wish. Yeah, if we could rewrite history, could we have had Eddie Murphy and Stallone on screen together?
That would have been an interesting mix. I don't know that it
how would their
worked.
egos had blended, because he would have wanted more cursing and
there's no way that would have worked. And you had to pair Eddie against one of two things in his best movies, and this is a good example. You had to give him the complete opposite, and the person that can play the, like, he's always going to be the slick one, right? So you have to play the one that's just going to be the bull in the china shop, and that's Nick Nolte in this movie, and
no, that's a good way to resurface it. It is kind of like they're all defensive the whole time.
Yes,
and and pretty much I want to call this the Stephen E. D'Souza universe, the Silver universe, because David Patrick Kelly, of all people, one of the tertiary bad guy I call in Commando, he's in this as the main robbing spree guy, and he's even more ruthless at times than Remar, even though he's kind of wimpy when they capture him.
right but I mean, that's the funny part is you get all these people that them from so many other things, and they're just playing their little part, and then you have your main two with Nolte and Eddie really working well together. And I think the thing that makes the Nolte character work in particular in this movie is that he actually does like 8 minutes of real cop work, which they used to let you do that in movies. They'd let you do like actual work. Then it all like became Law and Order, and that was it. We gotta do montages now, and that as close as you get to a montage is probably the second, I want to say, chase scene where they're in the car and they're apprehending Kelly. Yeah, more or less, but it's action scenes that are allowed to breathe, and Walter Hill was good at those. You have a lot going on at once, but there's room for dialogue in between. It's something 100%. And we'll talk about it in Beverly Hills Cop too, but it's something that Tony Scott borrows a lot from throughout his career, which I always enjoy, because you got to do exposition dumps.
That's a good contrast.
And you got to do those, and it's hard to do those without stopping the train. And Walter Hill was good at, like, the train is still moving, but we can have this conversation while it's happening. And
it's interesting, even when you know how it's going to turn out, like, he's able to invest you enough. And I mean, even the car conversations are just very well angled, and it's got kind of that neo-noir kind of look at times. Even it's just you feel like everything is alive, regardless of whether there's Foley in the background.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, is that everything in the movie feels very real. Like it's not something that looks like it's made up in Hollywood, because nobody's made to look pretty in this. They look like they looked. This is back before we just decided everything had to be this glam, cover of a magazine on a screen all the time. Everybody was just allowed to look the way they friggin' looked, and again, there's just a good realism to it, even though if you really boil it down, like the stuff that goes on in this is absolutely bonkers. Like the story is crazy. Like there's no way you'd be allowed to do any of this shit if you're a real police, but in Hollywood fake police world, like sure, this we can get off of this in California, where we're chasing road gangs down and we got unlicensed weapons and all this other shit going on. I mean, it's pretty wild, but they do a good job in this in 48 Hours of using the San Francisco scenery. And San Francisco's been the home of again, Dirty Harry, Bullet, so many iconic cop movies, action movies.
It does have
like
a
that.
Bullet vibe, and I think that's why it's not French Connection, it's not gritty, but I know what you mean. It's still it appeals to all kinds of just fan bases, those coming for a fun movie as well as a gritty movie. Because like you say, it allows you to just suspend the belief, just because you just know that, again, it's a popcorn movie with a heart. And I'm so glad you made the Tony Scott contrast, because Walter Hill is totally the same kind of guy, where he doesn't just do what a TV person often does, where they shoot something and it's left to the producers to supervise regardless of, or they don't even show up into the editing room. No, he is an editor first, and so if he sees a line that's weak, he'll cut it out.
Yeah, well, I mean, Walter and Tony both shared the idea that they worked in cuts, and for all of his flaws, Michael Bay works like this too. James Cameron works like this. You watch his movie.
Hell, that's why they all get along, because they got the same modus operandi, even though they're making totally different kinds of movies. Like Cameron is going to make a very self-indulgent but very moody and dramatic, sci-fi piece, and Michael Bay is going to go for over the top kind of frills, lowbrow, tongue-in-cheek shit-eating grins. And so it's like these two guys,
and Walter Hill's making westerns, and then Tony Scott is making rock and roll videos and everything.
He's totally
and that's
we'll
what
get to him here.
But I mean, that's the fun part of watching watching particularly Walter Hill work, is to be able to balance all of the kinetic action with the gritty realism, with Eddie's good comedy. And Eddie is hilarious in this. I mean, people think of Eddie Murphy now, and he is sort of like this family friendly Disney-esque. He's the donkey in Shrek. He just does those things, or he plays like 50 characters in one movie, and it's just ridiculous. He's doing all that Tyler Perry shit and stuff.
I haven't seen him in any Tyler Perry stuff. Are you thinking?
No. I mean, that kind of thing where he's everybody in the room at the same time. I mean, he's sort of that. Yeah. That's what I mean. But and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way, because some of that can work, but it can also
Would
go
you say
along.
He popularized it more until he got to Nutty Professor?
Yeah, and then it got to be too much, But I think Coming to America is probably the best multi-Eddie scene, because he was the only person he could work with was him and Arsenio, so it was just them.
It would have been so hysterical had he done it in this. He's just fresh off SNL, and this was just a side gig. But then he finally left it for Beverly Hills Cop. But it would have been so funny had he had two duplicate roles as one of the inmates, or say, hey man.
Right. Well, I mean, he was at the height of his comedy touring career too at this point. I mean, he had picked up the mantle that Dangerfield and really Richard Pryor had laid out for him, and Pryor was still doing things, but I think he was in recovery and lots of other things at this point. And Eddie had really come along as this shooting star, but he was funny on TV and he was so cute. And then he would say on his comedy albums, if you came here for that SNL shit, that shit is free. Go home and watch that. That is not what I'm here to do. And he would just get raw. I think this is before Raw came out.
He was subtly a raw do comic. That too. He would just kind of mix in, just hey, don't say I didn't warn you.
Yeah, I mean, he would tell you straight up, I'm about to talk about some nasty stuff on the stage, but he would do all of that stuff, and just he could tour forever. He was crazy, and it takes a director like Hill to be able, and Tony Scott, to be able to rein him in just a way that was it's just enough, because again, we talked about, they shoot with cuts in mind, so they know where to drop and where to cut and where to put him in, and you can tell that Hill is definitely, he was more experienced, I think, at this point than where Tony was when he finally got Beverly Hills Cop 2. And you can tell he really knew how to get just the right amount of Eddie's comedy mixed with Nick Nolte's, smoky, Jack Cates voice, and then all the gunplay and all the other stuff. And that's the other thing about Walter Hill movies; they're all gun porn, and so
the best kind.
They are. They're
before it became NRA ads. Now,
right? I mean, but before it was that, and like all the Stallone and Schwarzenegger gun porn movies from the '80s and early '90s that you like. It's Walter Hill has a lot to say about why those are the way they are, because Streets of Fire is a gun movie, for goodness sakes, in a lot of ways. The rifle's a damn character. I'm surprised he didn't have lines and sing a song.
I'm glad you brought that up, because and I think he just wants fun testosterone with excellent acting, and that's all he wants. And I think, people do complain about how Southern Comfort from the year before, no one saw it until years later, and everyone, notes the obvious Vietnam influence. But I think much like Coppola with Apocalypse Now, he doesn't want to be part of politics. He wants to just have escapism and just let it fall where it does. And I think you're onto it. I think you're totally just summed up that he wants, much like Tony wants to show some philosophy in between what could otherwise maybe be a bad version of, say, Death Wish, and he just ups it by making it just so even more nuanced and actually having the visuals accomplish it, as opposed to what other people do with over editing. I think, Hill does so much static, and what it means, as opposed to that's dull, that's generic, that's not well thought out.
I think Walter Hill is very good at working in dark and in the dark shadows. And there's so much of this movie is very dark, like the end shootout that goes down where Cates takes down the bad guys, and all that stuff is very reminiscent to, you watch the very end of Lethal Weapon when Murtaugh shoots the General McAllister's car right there in that alley after all that, that big chase scene. And, this is before Mel Gibson and Gary Busey do Karate Kid 4 on the damn lawn and everything that it's very similar to the way that the end of this movie is. And for a while, I would just conflate him in my head. I'm like, doesn't he like pull out this huge dirty hairy revolver and shoot him? Like, no, that's 48 hours. And I'm like you, I didn't see this until later when I was a kid. I was like 5 or 6 when this came out, so I wasn't gonna go see this, but I saw it on like VHS rental because I had a 5-year-older brother than me. I still have a 5-year-older brother, but I had one who would bring home stuff, and I could watch it. I could watch it with him. So that
did you
that
like
was,
it right away, or is it?
Oh yeah, I don't know that I even got most of it, but I dug it because I liked Eddie Murphy. I thought he was funny because I did watch SNL and I watched reruns, and I thought he was cool.
I was kind of the same way, where I didn't love it, but I respected it, and then I saw it again years later, and I was just like, okay, this is going in my top 10 buddy movies. Because
it's a completely good mix of it, and it's why it still works. I mean, the movie was made in 1982. We're talking about it 40 years later, and you can watch it now, and it's fun. I mean, it's definitely a product of its time. Like, there's stuff going on in there that, like, whoa, they couldn't do that today, which is like the weakest criticism, by the way, ever. I hate that.
Not even remotely. Yeah, that's like missing the point of the movie. I mean, the whole point is that they use atypical methods. Nolte's Cates, doesn't get along with anyone. Even some of the other cops kind of give him a cold shoulder, like, "Hey man, you okay? You look like you've been up all night." "Oh, I have." And Murphy's Hammond, he's just another guy. He's in there for just petty, I don't think they say theft, just being a con man kind of.
Yeah, I mean, well, he's supposedly ripped off like this huge payroll or something like that, but he claims he's innocent, and you kind of buy he might be, but he's such a good con man that he's probably not. It's sort of like and he'll never admit to it, but I kind of feel like Christopher McQuarrie borrowed a little bit of that for Kevin Pollak in Usual Suspects. But spoiler warning, by the way, he's the one that ripped off the train or whatever. That's
a good point.
Movie. But it's because when they finally reveal that, he just sort of Pollak just kind of shrugs. I'm like, yes, of course you put that on the comic. Like that's how he would pull it off. Like, no, of course I wouldn't do that. He did it. And so
I thought the same thing. It is one of those where, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Nolan was inspired by this in some way. But yeah, this, I mean,
look, Christopher Nolan absorbs these movies. Like, there's so much of his I'm surprised if he could have got half the actors to be in some of his stuff, he would have done it at this point, because he's a total mark for bringing back people from the 80s and just dropping them in a movie. And, you're like, oh, Matthew Modine's the fucking mayor of Gotham. Okay. Or whatever, I mean, like that's just what he does, and but it reminds you like, oh yeah, that person had like a whole life. And that's Christopher Nolan. That's what he likes to do.
They do.
But and I also think like Cates is very much a precursor to a lot of other gritty characters that came along much later,
so much.
Yeah.
And Olivia Brown plays the girlfriend Candy. You might remember her as one of the cops on Miami Vice. And Miami Vice, I'm sure would have existed, but I doubt it would have been ever even remotely had some producer in Hollywood not seen this mega hit,
No, I mean, I mean, her, I mean, that was 2 or 3 years later when she got Trudy, I think, for that show. But yeah, I mean, this kind of thing introduced that idea into
grit can be fun. You just got to balance it out. You got to have characters. And I mean, don't get me wrong. That's what buddy movies from this point on do well and don't do well. Some of them are really good action movies with funny or comedy that just doesn't work, and vice versa. Like the comedy is just great and then the action is just poorly inserted, like it's a last minute like change in tone. And so it's like this one was just one of those, it had to balance it out. And I can totally understand why what's his name who helmed Beverly Hills Cop, Martin Brest.
Martin Brest. Yeah, Martin Brest. Yeah,
had to improvise with Eddie because he was unimpressed with the, script, and it became bigger than the script. And I think the script was already basic, and so I would not be surprised. I mean, I guarantee you, the whole bar, the famous bar scene, has to be, some of it is definitely on the book for introducing, but I'm sure Eddie got some zingers in there that no one was expecting. It.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I've even heard him tell stories that they just let him. Again, they would let him riff, and then Walter would either go, "No, more of that, less of that, do that," and they would just let him do it. And he just did it so many times, he was exhausted by the end of it. It's when Eddie Murphy talks to me, he's like, "I didn't realize how friggin' hard it was to make movies." He said, I thought you just shot that shit and moved on. He said, because that was SNL. Like, you got nothing. You ran through it and you just did it. He said, I know nothing. And
he wasn't like Rodney Dangerfield where he's on Caddyshack and he's like, this isn't funny.
Right. Yeah.
I was laughing.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's sitting there doing it. He's keeping them all in stitches. And Walter would use the crew as judge for, okay, if that lands with y'all, it's going to land with the audience, and if it doesn't, guess what? It probably won't land with the audience, and that's the mark of a good director.
Is that on the Blu Ray? I know it released.
I just heard him talk about that in like a random interview once, man. I don't know if it's on that or not, but I've just heard him mention it. And Eddie changes his story so much now. This was like back in the 90s or something when he was being honest. So now the revisionist history on it. God knows, he's probably he wrote the script.
Don't say that. Don't ask me that.
Yeah, well, he'd be like Stallone, like I wrote all of it, or whatever. But that would be how he would do it. But no, I mean, I think the fun thing is the two of them together are very funny, and they clearly had a good. I don't know how they got along on the set. I don't remember any of that, but I do think that they clearly had some. That's a good question,
because I've never heard any of them speak ill of the other. I think Walter must have just let them know, just in on the joke. Hey, there's some racism in this. You guys are gonna say fucked up shit to each other and then get along by the end. I think he had to somewhere,
Yeah, I mean, they obviously worked that out ahead of time with like, look, this is we're and this was back when you just did those things and it was acting and you just went through it, and it's I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but it was just a movie and it was just a story and it was the time, and so it captured. Anyone
who has a problem with it, you'll hear about it after the fact on the way to the bank. But yeah, no, I know what you mean. It is. Someone must have been smart enough. I'm sure even, DeSouza, that's a minority if you can't tell from his surname. And I'm sure he, I notice minorities, if they joke with each other, they can often just let each other know, hey, and regardless of who's directing, everyone's on the same page of, this is a very politically incorrect movie and it's going to show two opposing people who eventually become friends in a funny, ironic twist.
Well, and I think that's the thing that they're trying to get away from is sort of the sanitized, like they didn't want to do the Dirty Harry thing necessarily, but they didn't want to do Starsky and Hutch either. You know, so
No, not even.
like, no, this is way too, that's way too tamped down. We got to find, the good middle of that. And
I'm sure Hush was
it.
the pitch. It definitely was the pitch. But no, I totally concur. I think, I mean, if anything, Dirty Harry was just similar in terms of the violence. And I mean, I even get a In the Heat of the Night vibe from this. This would be a fun too. I would totally do a double feature with that, of one of those movies. Pointier's great, hard-boiled detective in the Deep South with, downtown LA, where you're seeing 80s racism and in some extent misogyny and just toxic workplace.
And you could say it. I mean, it's a hallmark of 80s films, but Walter Hill films, or a lot of people like to say, Walter Hill doesn't really serve female characters in his films. I'm like, that's kind of bullshit, because
they're great here.
I was like, he's responsible for one, the Diane Lane character in Streets of Fire. It's friggin' awesome, and he's also responsible for Ellen Ripley, maybe the greatest action heroess of all time. So, I don't think that's really fair.
It's so not fair.
They are not the driving force of this story.
Well, plus all the guys in his movies get their asses beat. I mean, Streets of Fire, the main lead is overpowered by the villain, but he kicks the villain's ass no problem within like less than 10 minutes. But I mean, everybody has a falling point. I mean, even Peter Jason from Return of the Living Dead Free and Deadwood is here as the cowboy, and once again,
like Tom Cody gets his licks in Streets of Fire, like we said, but Ellen Aim is a strong character to balance him out with, even though some of it's clunky dialogue, but it works. But in this movie, both of these guys get beat to hell, but especially Nolte. I mean, and Nolte always looked good when he looked like he had gone a couple of rounds with like Martin Hagler or something,
butt ass naked or prepping, but it's never in a way like it would be now, where you're just like, I feel like I'm watching a totally different kind of movie. It's like, no, it's on the money, and again, all the bad guys, they get owned. But
completely.
And you never feel like they're weak or not well written or like they're not human, because a lot of people for a while, I mean, again, we've been talking about De Souza's work again. I think it goes without saying that everyone loves Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber, but there's plenty of movies that do a knockoff of him in not so good a way, to where you're like, okay, I just feel like I'm watching a very bad, again, like you say, Law and Order or
it's also like a different kind of villain too, like it's more sophisticated. And I like to say, like, this movie, particularly 48 Hours, and in some way Beverly Hills Cop, but very much the original 48 Hours, was made when wrestling heels, bad guys, were strictly like the roughest dudes in the room, and you knew that there were no anti-heroes, there was no fucking Stone Cold.
Just looking creepy at the camera, you're like, oh, they were business.
Bad news when they walked in the door, and you would be afraid of them. You would be afraid of Billy Bear. You'd be afraid of Gans. Like
I'm glad you brought him up. I didn't recognize him until like after the fact. I was like, okay, so that's the dude from Predator. Like, I knew about him, but by the 2000s, Sonny Landon was known for being a congressman,
right, which is wild to think about. But I mean, he
played his race card and he got in, and
I mean, he's a very intelligent man, and the fact that he played all these heavies is what makes it funny. You hear him speak, and you're like,
didn't he say some fucked up political shit or something like that?
Weren't you like cutting yourself on a bridge when Kevin Peter Hall's running after you? But I mean, I think he did. I don't remember what his fate was, but I know
he was following Ventura and Arnold, apparently. Like,
I think so. But I do like the fact that, again, that, like I said, the bad guys in this they are not good. They are bad. They're rough. They're gruff, and you're rooting for them to get blown away. It's before that we got into the sophisticated villain that, in some ways Lethal Weapon, but more like Die Hard brought us, and especially the first Die Hard. And, because they're not terrorists, they're thieves. That's the joke of
something
of
even
Hard.
The advertisers got wrong. But
right.
I saw some of what you were quoting on how Eastwood was supposed to be in this, but I mean, can you even picture Gregory Hines? He was.
See, that's the thing. Like,
I love Hines, but that's a different.
Yeah. Well, but see, they both tried to do this movie at other times. Like, Gregory Hines would try to do White Nights, and stuff like that, and he would be in all these, Eve of Destruction, which, boy, you talk about some bad sci-fi action. Go for that. That's some medium popcorn, low rent shit right there. But you have that, and then you've also got, Eastwood tried to do this with Charlie Sheen in the 90s, called The Rookie.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, which is sort of a quasi Dirty Harry sequel. It could be for the amount of people he just randomly shoots for no reason, or for reasons, but like for just action movie reasons.
No paperwork in Eastwood's world.
No, there's no damn paperwork. He shot the paperwork, but I could see him in this. But I don't think it would have worked because you'd be looking at him and you're like, oh yeah, it's fucking Dirty Harry. He's gonna be a badass. You see Nick Nolte and you're like, man, I don't know. This dude may not be that good. Like he may not make it. And that's why you appreciate him, because he's not the over the top hero.
And they each get their say. They all have their moments. Because like you said before in the bar scene, Eddie was treating that just no different than he would a live stand-up show. But yeah, Nolte pretty much is just like, yeah, I'm used to it. Is like, I got nothing constructive or nice to say, but he knows it too.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I can kind of buy that like Shane Black would have used this character in particular as a model for Hollenbach in Last Boy Scout. It's sort of the same kind of thing. I mean, it's very much in the same vein.
Absolutely. And don't you love how Frank McRae, the late great Frank McRae from License to Kill and Lockup, pretty much parodied this captain role in Loaded Weapon 1 and Last Action Hero. And so I just find it even funnier now when I was rewatching. I was like, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what became his whole gist. And much like Nolte and Remar, he's just working with a lot of those same Coppola, John Milius types. So his name was in their roster on affordable character actors who won't let you down,
Yeah, I mean, he did the same thing in Last Action Hero, I think, too. So, I mean, you just call that guy up.
I think he uses the exact word verbatim. Like, he uses some of the exact same words.
Yeah, just tamped it down, because I think that was a PG-13. But, that's... Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, it was McTiernan, too. So, there's a little different aesthetic going on there, because he's a different cat than, like, Hill and Scott. Discussion for another day. But
yeah, McTiernan is more kind of a... I guess I would compare.
He's like a college professor, man. Like if you hear him talk on his commentaries and stuff, like he's a deep like film dude. Like he is all about like coverage and angles and art and all this. I mean, he does a lot.
He's much like movies. Frankenheimer on the
he's more in that. He's more in that file like Billy Friedkin. He's in that crew versus like
Friedkin's a good comparison because I mean.
Mm-hmm. French Connection and
but did you get vibes even on this time of Cruising?
Yes, There's
without showing like anything,
the dark, nasty parts of society. Yes, it's very Cruising. Yeah, all of that.
And I'm glad you brought up Eddie's storyline because nowadays if someone wants to do something, they kind of just take from the Tarantino or Ocean's 11 kind of book, or even John Wick, like where I'm a badass out for revenge. I am not to be feared. But yeah, I mean. It says a lot when you can not every movie's good at like illustrating something with just dialogue. Sometimes they just have stuff and they mention. I think nowadays movies are so fast paced because again they're trying to ape movies like this or even Tony Scott, and they just think, oh yeah, the guy I told you about, but they just go way too fast and assume that everyone heard the name or knows what you're talking about, or they just over explain it in a very bland way to where you're like, okay, I don't have to watch the rest of the movie. I know everything that's going to happen.
Right.
And I mean, seen too much.
Yeah. And that's it's a good segue into another 48 Hours, which wasn't made until 8 years later, but is definitely the product of Eddie Murphy. He got back, two of the screenwriters he wanted. He got Walter Hill back. He got Nick back, obviously. And
they didn't get DeSouza, but they got Jeb Stewart, the co-writer of Die Hard.
Right. And they got Larry Gross back in there. And then John Fasano does work on it. And so, I mean, he got what he wanted in this, but it was very much more. I mean, you notice it. The credits are flipped. Eddie Murphy's top bill in the second one. And another 48 Hours to me has always been that example of like,
Fred Broughton,
it's a sequel that if it had been made 4 years before, it probably would work better. But at that point, things had changed so much in the world, and particularly in like cinematic universes when it came to cop movies and stuff, that this just felt like, oh well, that Lethal Weapon shit is happening again. Let's go back and bring back this. Let's do this. And at that point, Eddie needed to hit. Let's just be honest. In 1990, because things were starting to get a little out of whack for him, movie wise, and it doesn't entirely work because they're still trying to jump off of as these guys still know each other. It's still the same sort of area, but they're clearly much older. They're different. Nick Nolte's a totally different person in that movie.
I'll have concur. The way it starts, it's rough. It's awful in some ways. Like there's a shootout and everything, and you're just very confused for those 10 minutes.
Mhm.
I hated this movie growing up, but I absolutely love it now.
Really?
And I'll let you in because Hill was back here and he has kind of much like Carpenter and Friedkin, just the ability to compromise with the studios while also kind of not kissing their ass, but making fun of them. Like just the segment alone, like just how it ends exactly the same way, but they clue the audience, hey, it worked the first time, let's do it again. And that made it better. But don't get me wrong, the comedy for the most part is awful. It does not work. But the storyline, I absolutely adore it. Like Andrew Divoff, the Wishmaster, Toy Soldiers, which was written by Daniel Petrie of Beverly Hills Cop fame, like Air Force One. I just dug, like that's where the storyline did have to go. Like, yes, the Eddie ego stuff, it sucks. It's awful. The comedy doesn't work. But the storyline itself, I think it's a lot of fun. And yes, Kevin Teague is not the same as the Lieutenant, and Etta Ross from Red Heat, is a little underused. But having Divoff just be the whole, like, this is what I wish. This is why I like Die Hard with a Vengeance. There's a connection to the first movie in that, again, you've wronged the bad guy, and he's decided, okay. And it just, Divoff did so good, and they make it very clear. It's like, hey, I'm the brother of James Remar, and he's, I mean, rewatching it now, it does make better sense. I understand why they opened it out with him just, at a bar. It's just annoying because you see the credits in the desert, and that just gave you the wrong impression. But I get it. That was Hills just having his fun in the sun, Western style. But
right. I mean, he's trying to do it again. I think the thing is that I've always felt about the 48 Hours is that it is very much, let's try to replay the hits. But we're gonna go back to doing it. I liken it to when Kiss took the makeup off, and then they decided like, okay, let's not do that. Let's put it back on. But at that point, we're like, well, guys, we kind of know, like, you sort of blown it at this point.
Now that I would,
but it kind of works still. Like some of it still, like,
works.
They'll put out a song, and you're like, okay, yeah, that sounds like a fucking Kiss song, But it's not the same exactly. And I think the other thing too, and I like Brian James as again a heavy or your jerk partner or whatever. He's
part of the problems. His storyline got iced, no pun intended.
Yeah, and you can tell like this one felt like there was somebody else named, I won't call out names, but it rhymes with Schmurfy, who obviously had a lot more influence over how this script was
I didn't
go.
know that. I didn't. So he was pulling a Bill Shatner. He decided.
I've always felt like it did, because it feels like it's so much everything is so much more in service to what highlights him and the Reggie character. The thing that the Reggie character great in the first movie is he's peppered in just enough that it adds a good levity to all the other heinous shit that's going on in the movie. And in this one, it's like, well, I don't know. It's almost too neon and slick too. Like there's just something like Walter Hill does good things. Don't get me wrong. Slick is not his forte. It's not really what he does. And I think this movie's trying to be more
trying to make everyone happy. And unfortunately it does have a lot of hit and miss. I know he said he was inspired by the Sergio Leone movies, and I think that's just it. This was just made. I totally concur with your original point. Mm-hmm. This should have been made 2 years later or 5 years later, not almost a decade later. Because I think, I mean, I'm glad it didn't come out in the 2000s. 2000s, it would just absolutely suck because it would basically just do so much. I don't know why, but the 80s and 90s just were better at inviting just unrealistic, plausible, implausible shit to happen.
Yeah.
And by the time it got to the 2000s, you're just like, I'm just bored because I've just seen these formulas and I don't buy anything that's on screen. But yeah, I mean, that like you say, I mean, I think by this point, audiences were just now rejecting gruesome cinema unless it was just like a horror movie or a sci-fi thriller. and then they could kind of get in touch with that because we still had newer versions of the Twilight Zone and X-Files on TV to remind us stuff can be gritty and good.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean this is very much like Kiss, but putting on the makeup. But I think this is before they become lesser. I put both these movies in front of, say, Lethal Weapon 3 and 4, which you can watch, but I've tried watching those nowadays, and I get bored before halfway in. Like, I can watch a shootout, but I can't make it all the way through like I can Speed or the
third Lethal Weapon. The redeeming piece of that is that Renee Russo is a fucking acting champion and makes
she's
that
reminding
fun.
Everyone, get this back to order. And Gibson and Glover are off their leash, and they're not reined in. They're just they're reminding you about why you're having fun, but they're also reminding you about why these scripts aren't in on the joke anymore. They're just
right. There's the Joe Pesci thing that's way too much too, that one and all that.
Man.
Like, look, that Lethal Weapon 2 movie's got its problems and stuff, but the way that ends and the way it should have friggin' ended,
it was
with
supposed
Riggs
to
dead,
end, and Shane
like
Black was still involved regardless of the rewrite, and it's like
that would have been a great ending for those characters, but oh well, and now we're getting another one apparently, which God help us. But with the TV show is actually pretty decent though. But I'll say
for what
that,
it was,
for what it was. But now they're going to do a new movie with the old cast, and I'm like, man, these people are way too old for this now.
If it's only Glover and just if they do what they did with Shaft like 2019, I could have fun with it where they're making fun of all the guys. But even that was hit and miss for some crowds. So to me, it is like the billionth Rambo or Die Hard, where you're just like, okay. The story, or even Star Wars with me nowadays. Before Mandalorian, I was just like, okay, too much oversaturation.
Yep.
The storyline ends in my viewpoint here, but
but like I say, another 48 Hours is an example of a big star with a studio seeking to make a hit, trying to replay the hits of a big, seminal movie in their career. And it kind of works. Like if I was film stripping it, I would give it a medium and I wouldn't feel bad about it. It kind of works. What doesn't work about it is passable enough. And the other thing is it's only like 90 minutes long. Like when you cut the credits out of it, it's pretty quick. So it's not going to waste a lot of your time. And it goes down fairly easy.
You like the pyrotechnics, at least like the bus chase. I think that got me in the mood.
Oh,
where I'm just
no, look, the action scenes still work. Like Walter can direct all of that stuff. But again, there's like this sheen laying over it that I'm like, that's not like your color palette, my man. Like, and I can tell he's just caught in between time.
I totally agree. I didn't think about that. Like even the nightclub is, I will confess, it's shot a little bland. I like how it's got different kind of coverage, but it doesn't have those neon lights. And I just don't know if that was just him showing we're in the 90s or just what was available.
I think it is that weird time period, man, between the end of 1989 and like 1992 before like anything really established itself as the look of the 90s, or whatever. And we're just sort of figuring that out. We're away from what the 80s were, particularly the early 80s looked like the end of the 70s. So, I mean, you're almost like 2 decades off when you do the remake for
totally.
that. And
but
so
I'll
that's
give you
why
this. The manslaughter charge that this time, once again, Nolte has to frame himself for. That's interesting, but I wish they could have leaned on that more instead of, I've got to break Eddie out of prison again. I like the scene where he hits him in the basketball, but all the dialogue in that scene is hardly all that funny.
Yeah, it's like I say, it just kind of clunks. Like you're watching your favorite band try to recreate the thing that made them famous, but they're just not as good as they were at it the first time around.
It's But I mean, I did a double feature, and I actually found a lot of fun compared to Beverly Hills Cop, where, again, as you've illustrated, first one was funny, part 2 was kind of a blueprint for later Tony Scott, and part 3 was just a Sousa doing a Die Hard and a amusement park, and it was boring.
Yeah, that's the thing, and that's a good transition over, because that Beverly Hills Cop, we talked a little bit about, it was a Stallone vehicle, and it was this gritty, violent shit, and then it wasn't going to be all that. And by the time they got it, down to what became the movie that Eddie Murphy was in here, they had stripped through it so many different times that you clearly, Martin Brest had a good idea,
and he didn't even want to do part 3.
No, he didn't want anything. Yeah, but Martin Brest clearly knew what he wanted out of that first movie. And to the credit, again, Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, knew what they wanted that movie to be too. And
I'm glad you brought that up, because Bruckheimer and Silver, they were constantly at rivalry with each other. Your movie's going to make a bunch of money. How about I do a bunch of DMX and Jet Li movies?
Exactly. Yeah, they are constantly chasing each other. And the other thing, and I think the thing that
still each other's filmmakers too.
Yeah, and Simpson Bruckheimer figured out that the thing that the 48 Hours movies didn't get is that we got to know how to lace pop music into this. And the Axel F. Harold Faltermeyer thing, I mean, everybody's got that as a damn extra ringtone on your phone nowadays and stuff. But the Patti LaBelle tunes and stuff like this, I mean, it's definitely
Pointer
a product
Sisters,
of
baby.
its time. Pointer Sisters, yeah. This thing was awesome. This soundtrack
is just as much a character, much like even Ferris Bueller or John Hughes.
Yes, it's R&B pop gold, and it is and from the opening get.
I was raised on someone biased.
Yeah, when they're doing the cigarette bust that opens up the movie, and you get to meet Eddie and all of his shit, and the fact that they got a real cop, Gil Hill, to be the inspector, Todd, he says the only difference between me and
I didn't know that.
He said, yeah, he was a real Detroit police detective inspector. He was like part of the group that solved the Atlanta murders and stuff like that. I mean, he's like a decorated policeman. He's
is that his actual uniform, you think?
He was the real deal. He said the only difference between that character and himself was that he did not curse that much in real life. But these are the only 3 movies he ever did with the Beverly Hills Cop movies. He never did anything else. He got tons of offers, and he never did anything else because he said, "Nah, I didn't want to do that."
He ran as a Detroit mayor. Apparently.
He was a Detroit detective.
That's fucking awesome.
Inspector. He was the real deal.
Because he sounded real. He didn't sound like...
He's the Black Dennis Farina. You know, he's a real cop. I mean,
that's a good way of putting it. I'm surprised Farina wasn't in either of these. He would have been wonderful. Right? I mean, I know he hadn't transitioned over yet until like Manhunter, but I'm just saying that.
No, that's a good point. But he's in the same kind of vein. But it's that realism again. So we've got our realism, but we're gonna have a lot of fun with Eddie too, because there's a lot more comedy in Beverly Hills Cop, particularly Beverly Hills Cop 2. But Beverly Hills Cop is a lot of comedy because nobody knew what Judge Reinhold was at that point, and John Astin was just a TV actor. You know, he just played the grumpy dad. You know, and so he just
was
played
definitely my intro to him. I had
he's just playing Beethoven, but Judge Reinhold was either the yuppie jerk, you know.
Or Gremlins, especially, he's the boss.
Yeah,
briefly.
Or I'm thinking like Say No More's Fire, which is, oh boy, that one doesn't last. But or he's this nerd. This is what Brad could have done. You know, he's playing kind of the same Brad Fast Times character here, but he's so like pure and fun. And then you add in, like, you've got Ronnie Cox, who's awesome. Steven Berkoff,
to him before the
Steven Berkoff is either playing like a drug dealing art connoisseur or a Russian, you know, in any movie, you know. But
well, I'm with you because like you're only as good as the villain, and so like awesome Beverly Hills Cop 2, you can have fun, but you don't remember any of the villains other than Bridget Nielsen shooting up a place. In Part 3, who are the villains? There's like 5 different ones,
right? Well, and that's a shame in Part 2 because Jürgen Prochnow is a fucking awesome actor. Das Boot,
he's a great actor when he's got good material.
Movie.
But yeah, I mean.
He's totally overshadowed by Brigitte Nielsen, who was a thing at the time that was exploding into the.
She was kind of there, I think, because of the Cobra connection. It's like she.
Yeah, I mean, she was an Amazon, for goodness sakes. You know, she's 6'3", she's
Rocky
blonde, she's gorgeous, she's built, but she looks like she can be your date, but she could also beat the hell out of you. You know, she can shoot all these huge guns and shit. I mean, she's
manly woman, yeah.
Right. I mean, they were doing all that. I mean, they were doing all that Red Sonja shit with her and all that stuff.
Arnold,
she was supposed to be the female Arnold. She was. It just didn't work, and for reasons, because she's got a presence, but she doesn't have nearly the charisma that Arnold has. And I don't think she got it the way that Arnold gets it, or got what he was in his heyday.
I don't think she cared at that point because the stories weren't going to give her anything, so she's just like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, and I think too, Lisa Albacher is, as a kid in the 80s, and again, I saw this, a few years after it had been released, but it was on, this is the early days of VHS and renting things. But again, having an older brother has its advantages. And I mean, you talk about early crush. I'm like, ooh, hubba hubba, blonde art dealing girl all day.
She was a really good actress.
She is a great actress, but she carried herself as again, you talk about the 1980s, the characters that women really got to play a lot of times. I'm thinking of like Melanie Griffith in Working Girl, and some of these other things. Sigourney Weaver had a good turn in this, and even you go back a few more years before, like Broadcast News and stuff like that. Like,
Holly Hunter, there you go.
Yeah, is that Holly Hunter? Yeah, you get really interesting, alluring females, but they're not like totally sex appeal. They're actually smart. They have agency. They are fun to watch, and you buy the danger that they get themselves into, because they're not.
Yeah, she's
stupid.
like a reporter here,
Yeah.
and so there's a reason for her to be with these inspectors, but they
Right.
don't. Like you say, they illustrate Jenny as just someone who actually just wants to expose some corruption, not.
Well, I mean, it's their friend that gets murdered because he rips off some bearer bonds,
That's right. I forgot
And
about
that's the thing, is that all this happens is Axel gets vacation because he's already done the unauthorized sting, but he got out of that. He weaseled his way out of that with his captain or his inspector, because Inspector Todd's all up on his ass about that. And then the hit happens, and Todd's going, man, this is bad. This is bad news for you, Axel. You don't need to be getting around in this. You need to go. And he said, all right, I want my vacation. He's like, you just stay clear of this. And the way he says it to him, it's like, again, only a real cop would know how to not be 100 miles an hour at that moment. And he looks at him like, don't do it. Do not screw with me right now. And, when he winds up out in California, again, you have a lot of fun with it. And you think about
and Ashton and Reinhold. I mean,
they're perfect together. I mean, it's like father and son. Like, they are funny together. They're
even
great.
before Die Hard, kind of like if you take away McClane and Powell, then you got all the incompetent cops and FBI guys. So it's like these guys are cool in that they could carry a movie by themselves too if you took them
real
away.
Cops. They could have their own TV show. Like, they would be a good spinoff on it. Like, you could see them actually solving crime. They're actually doing paperwork.
yeah, you did. That's right. You do have a few scenes where they're at a desk and they're at least scribbling down something so you get in your head, as opposed to dicking around eating an apple or a donut. And I'm glad you brought that up, because like Ashton, is also an underrated actor, and he kind of just will always be known for this, and Bress's role as the bounty hunter in Midnight Run. But yeah, I mean, Reinhold is probably at his best here, because I don't know if you've heard, he also kind of had a bigger ego than Eddie.
Yeah.
I'm refusing to do things on SNL and all that. So
I mean, there's.
I'm glad that they got along on this. Like, they're still even keep in touch and everything. So that's wild. Yeah. They must have just been.
I think you can tell, like, and by all accounts, everybody that was making this had a lot of fun with it. As troubled as it was to finally get the movie to be made.
Yeah, you're a last minute replacement. Someone got fired for that, saying you will not do that again. Like, you will blacklist Stallone if he does some bullshit like that.
Right. I mean, they the fact that they got out of it what they got is great, and I think it's because the mystery is good. Watching Axel and Billy and Taggart solve the mystery along with Jenny of why are the coffee grounds, he's smuggling drugs, all this stuff. We're kind of peeling back the layers of how things work, and you're seeing them do actual detective work. It may not be like legitimately straightforward actual police work, but it's movie police work, and it makes it fun, and it draws you in. And the fact that the bad guy is not Gans or Billy Bear. He's a fucking art dealer that is like, he's a corrupt politician, among other ways, or a corrupt businessman. Like, there's nothing more 80s than that shit.
It's 80s, but it's still going on.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm
saying.
Just like, one of those. It's more subtle, kind of.
Yeah. I think the fact that he picks up a gun at the end of the movie is the part of it's like, man, you don't need to be holding that. You can't hold that gun.
That's the Lethal Weapon 2 moment where it's like, I have diplomatic immunity.
Yeah, like, no, not really, brother. No, I'm just gonna shoot you off that ledge. But it's a great. I mean, it's a great shootout too. I've always felt like the shootout at the end of this movie, that Stallone's Commando borrows a lot from it. It looks like the same friggin' house anyway. It may be, for all I know. Except it's not Stallone. It's Schwarzenegger. Except it's just Schwarzenegger shooting everybody instead of like the entire police department descending on that. That's what I've always appreciated.
So that would be good to know.
Is like all the cops show up.
They do.
It's not just 2 cops. It's 30 cops, as it would be, and all these bad guys. That's what I appreciate.
I'm glad you brought that up, and I definitely got that. I introduced this to my sister who had never seen it. It was on Comedy Central Uncut, and we said, hey, let's put out some time for this. I know you're just going to love this, and she loved it. But, I mean, it was one of those where yeah, like you say, they did pretty good. Mark Brest, apparently, according to his commentary, which is like the only special feature you're still getting on all the DVDs and Blu-rays, but I could fact check that. But yeah, he did a banged up job because like they shot at the same mansion that had been filmed for Scarface the year before, and this was his first time doing any kind of action. I'm like, well, hats off to you, because like, and I think to complement your point, much like Hill, he knew how to make actors, you know, if you don't like the dialogue, redo it here on the spot. And he and Eddie were constantly trying to be on each other's level. Like Eddie kind of wanted to do exactly what he had done in 48 Hours to Great Appeal and acclaim. I mean, he got a Golden Globe nomination, so he's not letting that one slide. He wants to do good. He wants to compliment his ego and make people say, "Hey, I love you, I love you." And Brest, I think he had done. If you've ever seen the original Going in Style, if not, please check it out. It's a fun, buddy movie then and there. So already perfect guy to pick for this kind of low key crowd pleaser. And I think he knew, after being fired over creative differences on War Games, I can't let any bullshit hit the fan. I can't risk that again, or I will be totally blacklisted or just be.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was a guy in need of a hit at that point, and to some extent, Bruckheimer and Simpson were too. Like they had gambled on a lot of stuff and it hadn't worked yet. And
people forget, but
exploded them. I mean,
people know him from all these other Nicolas Cage and Denzel Washington thrillers of the 90s, as well as Pirates. But they didn't
Gun and all that.
Top Gun,
tell you, like,
they didn't
Top
get
Gun
the Top Gun right.
Would not have happened if this movie hadn't hit.
They wouldn't have even been endorsed by the Navy at that point. They didn't have it in their budget. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing too is like the cast is so deep too. You got three great comics buried in this. Paul Reiser in there, Bronson Pinchot, and Damon.
I always
Wayans.
forget he's in it, and it's not because he's bad or anything. It's just he's like the tertiary character, just the backup.
Yeah,
funny.
They're just there. And if you're a Breaking Bad fan, Jonathan Banks is one of the hitmen, in this, who played Mike Arbitrage.
So this was my intro to him. This is before I'd seen 48 Hours, and I think he's only in like one scene as one of the cops. Doesn't he get shot? I think in 48 Hours.
I think so.
Yeah, he's the one in the opening raid. So but Hills Cop, I guarantee it. This has to be. I mean, because after this, he did just so much. He did Wise Guy the show, but in between, did a lot of schlocky, thrillers and everything before Breaking Bad, as Mike, Hitman Mike, Crooked Cop turned Hitman Mike, but I don't think without Cop he would have been on here.
No, I completely agree. And Beverly Hills Cop 2 it's a Tony Scott joint for sure. So Bruckheimer and Simpson are going to their guy, because after Top Gun, which was a friggin' mega hit, and this was a mega hit too. It made $270 million, for goodness sakes. They go back to the well with this. They bring Larry Ferguson in. He's a great screenwriter. He worked on
and I had to look him up because
Hunt for Red October, and
he was just the Paramount go-to guy at that point.
Yep, he was,
and he even plays himself in Last Action Hero.
Yeah, exactly. You got Warren Scarrin in there. I mean, he is the go-to guy. But this one is a much lighter fare in certain scenes. Everything Eddie's in is much. There's a much lighter touch to it, because he's trying to soften his image a little bit, I think, at that point. And he
didn't know what he had going, and I think he wasn't sure if he wanted to do sequels, despite him wanting to be, hot shit. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I mean, there's like you say, this is before we get top line Tony Scott, but I'm with you. He does pretty good considering what he's got, where the plot's kind of forced on you, but you kind of accept it because it just keeps going by so fast.
Right,
much like 40 Hours too. But
I would wonder if there's a fan edit of this somewhere that really just trims down the Axel being a goofball at the people's house and all the comedy stuff. And if you just watched like the 80 minutes, I guess.
I vaguely remember it. It just felt like it was there, but it wasn't 100%. And that's why it kind of got lampooned. But I mean,
yeah, but I'm saying like if you watch just the alphabet robberies and all of that stuff, which is kind of goofy, but if you just watch it, because again, it's shot with that Tony Scott, everybody's sweating profusely in the hot California sun shit, you know, that he loves to do because he's so good at shooting people when they're perspiring. It was like one of his things. But you watch that with that thumping soundtrack. Again, it's got a great pop soundtrack. You got fucking Shakedown from Bob Seger on this.
Oh, the soundtrack is definitely
you got James Ingram in Better Way. You know, you got Pointer Sisters back, but you know, Be There is not nearly as cool as the previous stuff. But you got I Want Your Sex in here. You got Corey Hall. You got
I couldn't
stuff.
not remember that. That was in the credits, so it's like of course I remember that. But yeah, I mean.
Right. But you've got Harold Faltermeyer really doing good work underneath all this, and it's a template for a lot of other action movies that borrowed from it. I think a lot of movies say they borrow.
Oh, this is Bad Boys.
Beverly Hills
Blueprint.
Cop. Beverly Hills Cop 2 is what a lot of movies borrow shit from, and
they don't borrow from the first one because it's mostly comedy, and it's like, well.
Right.
The action is fun, but it doesn't work 100%. Yeah. I think the only really, truly effective one has to be the finale when they're raiding the shipyard and they decide to be all funny. Like, how many movies can you name where someone dicks around with a rocket launcher? I see almost every other buddy movie has a rocket launcher or grenade sequence, and someone's like, "Oh my god, I didn't know it was a good shot," you know, shit like that.
Right. I mean, you've got all of the stuff. Ashton and Reinhold are back, and they're giving it everything they've got. Again, you've got Jürgen Prochnow, who's a great villain, and he just
hamming it
wasted.
I know some people who said,
but Dean Stockwell, this was like, you know, Quantum Leap. He was going to be everybody's favorite, you know, holographic simulation. You know, he's playing like a heavy, and it's kind of neat to see him get to do that.
I always forget he's in it, but I think, yeah. Had he not been in this Paramount production, I don't think he would have gotten the Belisario card. I don't think.
No. I mean, that got him this gig. But you've got a deep cast. There's some fun people, you know, in it.
I'm glad you brought up Prochnow because I think I've known people who said that was their intro to him. They had never seen Dune or Das Boot or even Air Force One at that point. I'm like, really? Okay, but that makes sense. That was in between kind of gigs, so you're going to be stock Russian bad guy.
Yeah. I mean, he's the stock foreign bad guy or whatever. But I love that. But he's got. I mean, part of it is too the name just makes Maxwell Dent. I'm like, that is not what that guy's name would be. You should have changed that to like fit him and more what he was.
But backstory on that would have been fun because I get that they're also kind of thieves who are forging stuff. They're like Eddie Murphy's character in 48 Hours if they were successful.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, his whole
backstory.
Like he's lost a ton of money, and he's trying to not get killed by the people's money that he lost. So he's basically robbing himself, and the proceeds are going through, and then the insurance money pays it back. And all, I mean, it's a complicated little scheme, and I like that because that's why I say like if you can get around the Eddie Murphy being too much of Eddie Murphy because he is too much in this movie.
I didn't think of that.
The action movie part of this is pretty good. Like it's actually kind of fun. It's not great. I put it along the same lines as Another 48 Hours. But it was made close enough. It was within 5 years. They really made it like 4 years later, and it just got delayed. Coming out. But they hit it at the right time to do it. 48 Hours waited almost 10 years, and this one did it within 4 or 5 years, which is when you should do that if you're going to do that again. And nowadays they do it in a year and a half, right?
Because like 48 Hours, it has a rough beginning, but eventually you settle down. And you're like, it's fun. It's not needed, but it's fun.
And it's got a fun like subplot with the jerk captain that's always yelling at everybody, and and the mayor.
He does have some good screen time, although I will say that's what's also rough at the beginning is like instantly Ronnie Cox's captain gets shot and injured, and you're just like, whoa, what did this have to do with anything? But
right,
it kind of forces it on you. But Scott, fortunately, is good at working through cliches. Just keep the movie running, so you don't have time to complain. But I know what you mean. It's like, and then
we go to Beverly Hills Cop 3, which is.
Oh wait, hold up. Yeah. Well, I got to ask you, who was the better parking valet, Damon Wayans or Chris Rock?
Before we get Chris Rock's a better parking valet, but Damon Wayans is definitely the better banana.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thought. Is like I recall Chris Rock's, but being a standout in the movie, but I also just thought Damon just was more naturally funny just because the scene, you know, it invented
He
the
is
whole
Chris,
banana.
Chris Rock is a kid, like a legit kid in this. Like he is nobody in this, and you can tell he knows he's nobody. But it's
He's invited because Eddie knew him or something.
yeah. I mean, it was Eddie. I mean, and good on Eddie. He's always been good to do the things that other people did for him, and some who didn't do it for him too, was to open the door for other people. You know, be somebody who elevates other young, you know, actors, comics, things like that in the community. And he you know, Chris Rock owes a lot to Eddie Murphy, and he'll tell you that. But
And he do.
but I'll tell you this, Eddie Murphy stand up, and I don't even know if he could even do it nowadays. Anything nowadays, I don't know.
I don't think he wants to nowadays.
I think he wants to.
do a movie.
Chris Rock can still kill on the stage, and he
totally.
He's really good, but it took him a long time. Like he got fired on SNL. Like it took him losing that to really figure out what he was doing.
Well, and you know, he went through a painful divorce too.
Yes. I mean,
so I think he realized I can be broke at any time, regardless of my fame. I'm not unbreakable.
Right. So I mean, he is refined into the good stuff. In spite of what Spiral from the Book of Saw would let you believe, he can still act and do things. Beverly Hills Cop 3 is what I call, let me get my friends together because we all need something good to happen, and then nothing good happens.
Right.
This is bad. Like this is all horrible. You get D'Souza back, John Landis, who was definitely persona
already
non grata.
pretty blacklisted in that area. Not a good idea.
I'm gonna call my buddy Nile Rodgers to do the soundtrack. Now the movie made a lot of money because people wanted to see this again. But it was 7 years later, and we had moved on from this model.
And he didn't want to do it, and he wasn't promoting it.
He didn't want to do it, and you can tell. Like you talked about it earlier. You can tell he is not interested in this. This is not. And it's a dumbass premise. It's boring. It's not fun.
I was just oblivious to it, but yeah, on parts of it, I would rewatch it and be like, "There's some good scenes here, but it's just." The mid section is okay. How it begins, how it ends, very inconsequential to everything else going on. It just doesn't feel like it was even. I get that movies aren't filmed in any order, but like this doesn't feel like it's in any kind of order. It just feels like everyone was just so pissed off about having to work with a star. Like I mean that just happens. If someone doesn't want to be there, you get that vibe on the rest of the film crew. They don't want to really finish it. They don't want to be credited, and that's just what it reads as. And it's a shame because like you said, it could have just ended with those first two movies, and that would have been okay. You could have waited for it to gain some attention, and everyone says, bring it back now. And I think again, Landis, he's done some good comedies, but let's not forget his, infamy, just disregarding safety and everything. I'm surprised they even invited him back.
I that had to be an Eddie thing that I'm only doing this if you let him do this because he wasn't. I mean that had to be it. That's all I can think of. And
it's not coming to America either. It's not even low key.
It's not even close. It's nowhere close to any of that. But I think the other thing too, and I joked about it, that Metro is the better version of what this should have been. That was made in 97, and that actually would have worked as a Beverly Hills Cop movie, and it kind of should have been because it's a much better story. I wish it could have, and it's a shame because while Metro is easy to figure out, you just invested because it's a Miami Vice kind of storyline, and this one, I mean, there's so many good actors. I mean, Carhart, John Saxon, even Teresa Randall who's later in Bad Boys, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Bruckheimer and even Simpson abandoned ship. They just said, nope, not going to even fool with it. It is. So I think that's just it. When Eddie's running the show and he doesn't want to be there, that's just not great. But I mean, even what's his name? Bronson Pinchot, he's reprising his role. And I do kind of like the music video he's showing off. That's amusing, but that's like as funny as it gets. The rest of the time, it's just a disconnected, lazy shoot 'em up. And you're just like, okay. I mean, because like Stephen McHattie, he's always a great bad guy. You might remember from A History of Violence and Pontypool, and completely. But again, they're all wasted in this
totally wasted
script that looked like it got. And no offense, I mean, it does not look like there was a lot of love put into it. And maybe what got shot wasn't what was written. That is not. It wouldn't surprise me, at all.
Because the Secret Service agent plot in the third portion could have worked.
Cool. That could have worked.
Why doesn't it have more?
It's just screwed up again. It just feels like we're trying to recreate something that has passed. It's past us, and there's no love in it at all. It's not fun, and it makes you. I think in retrospect, because I'd always felt like Beverly Hills Cop is a real come down. Like part 2 is a real come down from the first one. That first one's infinitely rewatchable. That second one, again, you can kind of watch it, and then Eddie starts screwing around. You can go away and do something else, vacuum, whatever, and then come back and and
you say, do a fan edit of the non-comedy bits and just have part 2.
Just have the action movie. Yeah, just have the action movie, and it's because you got Tony Scott's touch on it. John Landis can't direct this kind of stuff. I mean, like American Werewolf in London notwithstanding, like he can't direct action, and that's not what he does. And again, there's a lot of reasons why this was done.
Growing up, it was a 3 out of 5 for me. Nowadays, it's a 2 out of 5 because it is junky. And the reason I'm going with this is I find it way better than like some of today's really bad like buddy formula movies. Like I'll take this over something like Ride Along or Rush Hour Free.
Oh yeah, see, those all those movies,
because those are so uninspired, and everyone would always say, "Oh, it's Die Hard. Oh, it's Lethal Weapon." I'm like, no, it's Eddie Murphy formula. It's total Axel Foley, 48 hours,
but not as funny, and not
even remotely funny.
I mean, Jackie Chan, coolness aside, it's not nearly as cool as this, and as where this came from. And that's what I'm saying. I'm curious though, because I know they have batted around for probably 8 or 9 years now doing a fourth one, and apparently it's in production or it's in
because Dolomite was just so damn good. And
and then Coming to America 2 was okay. I mean, it wasn't awful. It was funny, and it's going to go straight to Netflix, which
it worked as a streaming movie. It would not have worked as like a
theatrical. So I'm curious to see what it does. But like I say, that My Name is Dolomite was awesome. Like that was that was Eddie returning to form. I really thought like he was going to get it for that one.
Oh, and nailed it. IndieWire, I think, summed it up perfectly. He was able to relate to this guy who was ego-headed because he had been and who just
been there,
who had failed massively, and he was like, "Yeah, that's where I've been the last 20 years before Shrek came along." So it was like, yeah, I think he was able to laugh at himself finally and make a very fascinating tale with some great guys who'd done some other the Andy Kaufman movie with Jim Carrey. So it's like he was in good hands there. And like you say, it's just like Bad Boys. It's fun, but it's more just, Will Smith and Martin Lawrence wanting to do what they want. And just reminds you of how much better Beverly Hills Cop is. But in many ways, I can only see it coming to life because of Bruckheimer wanting to replicate his success with, Beverly Hills Cop, more Miami set action. And in all fairness, they had a bunch of other guys who worked on stuff like, various comedies as well as the Die Hard films. So it's like that when I felt like that made its own impact, regardless of not measuring up to those other movies. But like you say, I mean, Rush Hour is only pretty much exists because of Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker. Like Chris Tucker was funny. He was never Eddie. He was never even Chris Rock, but he was amusing in that own respect. And Jackie Chan got to demonstrate a lot of the stunts that longtime and newcomers, we're going to later expect from him. But yeah, it's like the plots, what plot,
there's no plot, and
there's virtually no plot.
But you know what? Those movies got made because Brett Ratner turns in stuff on time and under budget. And that's
before we knew what a creepy was. And
before we knew what a total creepy was.
And it was weird because I knew he was an asshole. He had been with Eddie Murphy and produced his award show and everything that was supposed to happen, but I didn't know he was a douchebag. He was going around raping actresses. So it's like,
but I mean, that's why he kept getting work. So he turned in that stuff, and you can tell they're paint by numbers action comedies.
Very lazy, but
amusing, very lazy. And I think that'd be how I would sum up the third one. Is it's incredibly lazy. The second act has some cool stuff going on, and then there's
too late though.
It's too late. And then when they get to the cool secret agent, third double agent thing, it's like, well, okay, we've blown that now. Like you had the chance to set that up.
That must have been as much as they followed from Steven DeSouza. And the first part was just, let's have a bunch of guys get slaughtered in a mechanic shop. I'm like, but what does that got to do with the rest of this? What's going on here? And like you say, all these movies, I think this is it. It's like 48 Hours, Part 2, and Beverly Hills Cop 2. They start off rough, but they just kind of just pick up the slack, even when the comedy isn't working in them. And it's like the comedy doesn't work in this, and the beginning especially, just like cut it out. Nothing changes. You could have literally, because I love Hector Elizondo. How can you not? From Chicago Hope as the new captain, and it's already bad enough that they had to replace Ronnie Cox because he was unimpressed with the script. But it's like you could have literally just started there, and it was interesting just seeing Judge Reinhold just, hey, I'm finally in charge. I'm your boss now. That was some comedy potential that could have worked, and they just, I'm a sergeant now. And
they squandered it. They squandered all of it.
Totally wasted it.
Yeah, totally wasted it. So, and that's the thing about these franchises like this, these sort of small ones, is that you can see the steep decline between them. Like the original films, 48 Hours and Beverly Hills Cop, those still work. They're iconic. That watch them, absolutely. They are great moments of the marriage of action and comedy. And then you can see their sequels, and it's like, well, it's the lesser version of that, so it's already not as good, but it's okay. It's not bad. It's passable. And they never did another 48 Hours. They kind of did with that stakeout movie, which we're not going to talk about that. But they totally, you see it totally go off the rails in Beverly Hills Cop 3.
So
like,
you brought out Stakeout. That was another example. I was like, I know some people really like those and others just really hate them. I always thought they were watchable, but could never relate to any of the comedy or action in them. And I think it was just because like 48 Hours was just so fluid for the most part. Like you just loved, again, just Walter's sense of characterization. And like you say, the first two Beverly Hills Cops were good at just, again, just the comedy for the most part was working, and you just liked the characters even when something wasn't working before you got to Part 3. And I mean, we were talking about Metro. How awesome would it have been if Michael Wincott had been in this, the same time he was in The Crow?
Much better, right?
Then he would have probably been even more standout because it's his moment to shine. It's his first real big moment in the sun.
I mean, and that's the thing I would say too, is that the bad guys in 48 Hours in Beverly Hills Cop and the bad guys in Beverly Hills Cop 2, they are all like, there's something to follow there. Like they're layered. They're not just caricatures, they're, I mean, even as just heavy drug dealers in 48 Hours, like you buy that there's a whole web of shit going on in that movie. Right. And then Beverly Hills Cop and Beverly Hills Cop 2 they're mysteries in some ways. And that, you don't know until,
and they had their own style. Like, because like you wouldn't have gotten that, what you would get from like a Miami Vice or like you say, any procedural show. Cause I mean, those were all about, the grit and hard-boiled cops undercover. And it's like, with like you say, with Hills Cop, it's a party movie. You're seeing a guy break the rules, and you're already encouraged to just suspend reality because he's doing something that would get anyone instantly fired, and you want to see how he'll get out of it, who will make an exception, and like you say, the criminals were interesting. I think 48 Hours, though, they get close to almost getting Die Hard level, not in terms of being organized, but just being very fascinating, if you will.
No, I agree.
And Cop is totally just more just quotable, like dialogue down to a T, and just.
Well, it's fun. It's infinitely fun. Those two movies are infinitely fun. Whereas Beverly Hills Cop 3 should be forgotten from existence, which most people have anyway. So
I think they have. I think everyone's had enough time to heal, and I barely even see it on TV nowadays. I can't recall the last time someone said, "Hey, someone totally wants to watch Part 3." It's like, no, let's watch Part 1, maybe Part 2.
Yeah, completely.
So how would you rank like your top 5 buddy franchises, you think?
Oh man.
You think, okay. So if you don't want to list it, like what would, obviously the first Beverly Hills Cop and 48 Hours are going to be on there. You think they'd be above Lethal Weapon and Die Hard 1 or 3?
I would, because I think that Lethal Weapon would not have happened if it had been, particularly for 48 hours. And I think in some extent Beverly Hills Cop, though I think it has more to align with in 48 hours than anything. So I would go, but just in saying that though, like honestly, like that first Lethal Weapon movie is stellar. Like it really
it still
is.
rocks. It's just,
but as a
like,
franchise, it does not. It does not last long. So if you were to tell me, like, take the first films of these things, where would I put them? I would tell you that I think Lethal Weapon is the best movie out of all of them. And then I would put Beverly Hills Cop above 48 Hours only because I happen to like the tone of Beverly Hills Cop a little bit more. It's just more my kind of thing. But that's nothing against 40 Hours. Yeah. It's a little easier going down. Yeah. And then you've got 48 Hours, and then I would say anything else like Rush Hour and all that shit. Because afterward.
Because like Die Hard is like number one for me, but it's also a franchise with its issues, and it's like part 2 and 5 especially have moments where you're just like, yeah, but it was done so much better the first time around. And part 3 and parts of part 4 kind of got away just because the buddy element was fun there, even though the plot was bananas. And it's like, because like you say, like Lethal Weapon was kind of the popular kid in school, and Die Hard movies are making money, but it's like Eddie's franchises kind of kickstarted those both, and yet they're kind of only just acknowledged as Eddie Murphy comedies with some action in them. It's like, well, but there's kind of so much more than that. They really are like, if you put Beverly Hills Cop, it would be like on just a random Friday night. You're inviting friends over and it's on in the background. People would just be eating tons of cheese, having a bunch of wine, and they would be happy.
Exactly. It's that I put Die Hard in a different place, I guess, because I know that there's a buddy element to it.
Well, just I never felt like, but I know what you mean. It's more of it's a different. It's kind of a different animal in some ways, and boy, it really, talk about a series that goes up and down and up and way down, and stuff like that. But I mean, of them all, like I think, like you could have a hell of a triple feature if you wanted to go 48 Hours, Beverly Hills Cop, Lethal Weapon. That would be a pretty stellar like action buddy comedy kind of trilogy right there. Yeah, because I mean, especially because like of all the villains, I do feel like Lethal Weapon it just became bigger just because everyone loved the charisma between Glover and Gibson and later Russo, and it's like, but it's like you say, is like you're only. I mean,
those villains are sinister though, man. Mitchell Ryan and Gary Busey are fucking scary in that first.
They're great, and they just something that Jet Li wasn't able to capture in part 4, and I mean,
which is sad because he's awesome, but
he's like, excellent.
You can tell like, oh, that'd have been so much cooler.
He has a great line in China, you'd be dead, but it's just like with part 3, like that could have been a fun Assault on Precinct 13 kind of movie with a bunch of crooked cops doing a bunch of armored car robberies, and it's just totally squandered in favor of cheap gags and just knowing that no one will actually die. And so it's just like you say, it's just like the first one is just closer to BHC 1 and first 48 Hours and maybe parts of part 2, even though it's on steroids. Is like, because you got the whole the world they've just created in the first 10 frames, and it's like, I'm set for life. I don't any plot holes or over the top moments, you're only going to get on the 10th viewing,
Yeah, completely.
And like you say, I mean, they welcome the over the top moments by characterizing it well for a genre piece instead of, like the other movies where they're just like rush into production. Script doesn't matter. Worry about it later.
Yeah, it was this thing that horror sequels, particularly the 80s franchises fell into, where they were just trying to throw something on the screen as fast as they could, and you can tell like, oh, we fucked that up. Like it's and I mean, a lot of those producers now will say like, yeah, we screwed that up by putting that out too fast, and so.
But at the time, everyone.
But at the time, I mean, look, if you're getting stuff greenlit, you go with it. I understand, I get it. Like, go with it. It doesn't work.
And it's such a shame because Joel Silver, was typically very passionate. I never got that from Bruckheimer in interviews, how he liked movies, but whether or not they worked or not as a whole, I never got that. But Silver, it was just such a shame because it's like he was one of the few who just seemed to was constantly quoted as like, I love these kinds of movies and I need these kinds of elements in everything I work on, and because it works as a crowd pleasing. It worked in the 40s, it works in the 70s, it's going to work now. And I think, with Lethal Weapon, he just pretty much just wanted something easy on the side as a hustle for Richard Donner and company to do. And it's like, well, again, they didn't need to do that. And
it could have been more. It could have been more, but it was what it was. But for these two men, like I say, it's a great double feature to talk about, and it's fun to go back and revisit these things. It had been a while since I had seen them, so it was fun to go back and dig them up.
They really don't get all that played all that much on TV. The most I see is like VH1 or Spike TV might play them because it's in the Paramount vault. But it's kind of sad. You would think they'd want to play them more on some of the movie channels or something, and I don't know if it's just they figure everyone's gotten all the DVDs, but yeah, I mean, I do need to get the 48 hours Blu-rays when they discount. It's just kind of a shame because like we kind of glossed over in part 2. Like I'm speaking about Crooked Cops and Lethal Weapon 3. There's a Crooked Cop storyline that I think would have been, I only briefly talked about on part 2, and I really wish there could be a restored version of that somewhere. Just that's all I need. Just some scene earlier with a mysterious figure. Who is that mysterious guy who's later found to be a crooked cop from the first one? And it seems like that's as good as we're going to get, because it seems like, if I recall correctly, from movies like Virtuosity and Event Horizon, Paramount apparently had I don't think they had a fire, but I think they lost a lot of their film reels.
They say that. I think they just that what they, particularly for Event Horizon, they knew that was a turkey that wasn't going to fly, and they just got rid of it. I don't think they ever thought that there would be any kind of a cult following for that. And even admittedly, the cult following for that movie is only in watching how it just evolves into insanity at some point.
That's fair. I mean, it's a movie I was half and half on growing up, and I mean, it's a fun revisit. We talked about it on Films for Begins and Films for Archives. Y'all can go listen to us review it. And I'll say that the thing about that is that the people that made the trailer for that obviously had no idea what the hell that movie was. Because the trailer has nothing to do with that movie. If they had known, they probably could have sold it better. But I was even rewatching all the Star Trek shows, and they started using stock footage from that movie in some of those seasons.
There's some stuff that works in it. There's definitely parts of it where it just goes into crazy town, and
it's like it was a technical feat, and then the rest of it was just like a rated story. But I mean, Paramount just seems to also just be shady in general. They don't want to go the extra mile. They only want to put money in their streaming platform at this point. And any Blu-rays they release are pretty much going to be, stripped down versions of their DVDs from years ago, to where you might as well stick with them. Or I don't know. It just seems like it's just, I'm just getting at, it seems like they don't pay much of their library as much attention as they do, say, unless it's a TV franchise.
And I think part of that is it's changed. Ownership has changed hands so many times that you just got people that just don't have any reverence for it at all anymore.
I mean,
that's part of the
Indiana
problem.
Jones makes sense because you got Lucas
but that's because Steven is still going. You will make good on that.
You're very influential, and I'm sure he could.
The man had enough stroke to do $100 million musical that bombed. He did it as a passion project and a love letter to his dad, and he's still going to get everything.
Hell, he made it in the wrong era for these kinds of musicals.
He totally did. I mean, even for,
and he's untouchable. People are still going to be hyped up if they hear, "Oh, Spielberg's now working on this." Now he's working on something with David Lynch making the acting cameo, and everyone's
exactly. Yeah, I mean, so it's. I mean, yeah, he's always going to have stroke. I mean, no doubt. And
Spielberg, can you give Eddie some money or something?
Also, let's not discount the fact that Steven loves George, and Raiders, the Indiana Jones stuff is half Lucas's too, and he's good. And even though George he doesn't care anymore. He's got his money. He just does what he does now. But Steven's always going to protect his buddy. He's not going to let anybody talk bad about George and ruin George's stuff. So he's not. No, but he sold Star Wars. He got that one away from me, but you're going to mess up anything else. And so, but his name's on it too. So that's I know that about old Steve. So he ain't gonna let that go down like that.
No, why would he?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at this point, he's a freaking icon. I will go watch Steven Spielberg make bad movies. I don't care. I like him. I like his schmaltz. I will watch it because now he just does stuff to try to. he just, it's almost like he's just challenging himself, like he's trying to finish off like all the Xbox challenges. Like, well, I'm going to make a fucking video game movie, and then I'm going to make a musical, and I don't know, then I'll.
The only thing he hasn't done yet is a Western, so maybe he could get schooled
Maybe
by
next,
Walter Hill.
I mean, those are going to be cool again now because Yellowstone is everywhere. So, that might be the next
I'm
thing.
glad you made a contrast to that because, we were talking about streaming before, and it's like that's a show that shouldn't have worked in this day and age, but it did. And I think, like you say, everything is all about timing. It's like, what is the hot shit at that time? And like, because
I'll tell you, and I don't know how they would ever do it, but talking about one that's buried in Walter Hill's catalog that I love, and it's Silverado. If you ever wanted to try to resurrect something, well, give me that again, baby, because that worked. That movie is awesome. Everybody that likes Yellowstone, you need to go watch that because that's some Kevin Costner, Scott Glenn, Kevin Kline, Danny
that's
Glover.
Lawrence Kasdan.
Yes, Lawrence Kasdan. Yeah.
But yes,
but still, Hill's
so
involved in it too. I mean, that is a stellar one that
I saw the director's episode on that about a year and a half ago, and Kasdan was just like, they didn't want to release it, and it got lots of acclaim, despite it's like, and so I think that's a good trope. Is like Westerns seem to work if you cover them up, like John Hillcoat and even other things that Taylor Sheridan from Yellowstone has worked on. It seems like even Dennis Van Knobs, in some extent, is like they can have a movie that flops money wise, but makes it back after the fact. But it's like they're pretty much, they're making a lot of movies that are technically neo-Western, neo-war movies.
Yeah, Hell or High Water is very much a neo-Western.
It's a total even, but it seemed like other than the Coen brothers, no one was really making Westerns. It's like they would make them here and there, and they would never make any money. And it's like you don't know if so much of it is audiences just not caring for it unless it's on TV, or if it's just not sure how to market it, or if they
I think it's just not knowing how to tell that story and tell it the way that
make
like
it
the
stand
Hollywood romantic way is of it. It's like, 'cause we know that's not how it was. And it's also because you're always going to chase pinnacles of the genre, particularly like all the Sergio Leone and Clint Eastwood stuff. You've got all of that. Then you've got things like Tombstone, which is just a remarkable film, and then even something really good like Open Range is a great Western. But you've
Range
got things like Lonesome Dove, which is a great miniseries, the Sackets, all that kind of stuff on
That's
TV.
a good point. Unless Robert Duvall stars in it, another comeback role, a lot of people don't really get hyped up for it. And I mean, John Fasano worked on Tombstone, and I mean, there's a connection to today's topic. I mean, that was another one where that was a movie that should not have worked, but
hey, you know what? For all the Sly's stuff, and he gets a lot of crap, and he deserves a lot of it. He's the one that told Russell, if you bring George in, all you got to do is just tell him what you want the night before, and he will do it.
It's so funny. I had never heard that story, but years prior I had read Vic Armstrong's book, and he talked about how he was working on like a World War II movie with Roger Moore in Italy, and everyone hated the guy. He was a hag. He treated people like shit. And he pretty much took over directing the movie and saved that film and made it have a budget. And so it's like, it's so funny how, there's some guys they can make orders, but they have zero inspiration or tone. And so it's like, it's just, sometimes that's all you need. You just need a guy who you can boss around. And when you hear stories from Kurt just saying everyone would virtually direct a scene, Ball Kilmer directed like 3 scenes, even Billy Bob directed a scene. It's like that's
Bill Paxton did stuff. Powers Booth did
he
stuff.
became a director on the side on the occasion.
I mean, you had a lot of people that knew what to do, and you just had to have the guy that could run the interference with the studio, and George Cosmatos would do that. And
pretty much,
and I mean, and look, and Kurt and Stallone are friends, like they've been, friends for years, Tango Cash, all that stuff, and that's what he told him. He was like, just you bring George in, and it'll be okay. Like you can do it, because they'll never let you do it. It'll tie it up. The movie will get stopped. But if you want to get it made, that's how you do it. And it was Kurt Russell and all those other people pulling stuff together and making that work, and it's fabulous. I mean, God, you talk about something that holds up tremendously. I mean, you want to do a Val Kilmer double shot, do that and do Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. they're years apart, but you talk about some powerful
Sure, we can do some more modern day westerns. We could talk Young Guns, and we can even talk about how this blows Wyatt Earp out of the park.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's the thing. That Wyatt Earp movie, if it hadn't have been made when there was Tombstone, is actually not bad. It's pretty good.
I loved Dennis Quaid's portrayal of
it's much more realistic
of the holiday, but at the same time, it's one of those like, had I not seen it on cable TV, I can see why many were tuning out by the second hour. It's just too much to cram.
It's just it's another one of Costner and his little overindulgences. Though I'll tell you,
Costner is doing what he wants, but yeah, like you say, Costner, much like Eddie, he had a big head, and is like, oh, okay, you're not too big to fall, buddy. You got to slow this train.
Well, and that's why I say he redeemed himself. If you haven't watched it again, it's definitely a great ensemble piece. Open Range is a fantastic Western.
Did you ever see that interview on AMC where Duvall said that this was his trilogy: Lonesome Dove, Open Range, and then Broken Trail, a miniseries he did with Walter Hill?
I did not see that, but I could see that. That'd be a great.
I'd seen them both back to back on there. Open Range and Broken Trail. And it's like, oh, amazing westerns. I love being a cowboy or
Open Range had a great realism to it that just made it fun. Tombstone is like the Tony Scott action version of a Western, to sort of
it's more Tarantino than the Tarantino movie. They all got great lines in. I mean, this is before everyone was trying to be like psychological, like Fight Club and everything. Like,
I'm a fan of the old Kirk Douglas, Burt Lancaster Gunfight at the OK Corral. That movie's fun. Like
that's fun too. And basically, they wanted to do a 50s Technicolor.
They redid
Western.
that. Yeah, they redid that in the 90s, and it worked because you've got a cast full of great character actors that pull that stuff off.
John Kinney's a great character actor. He was in that and Beverly Hills Cop 3 the same year. Guess which one I remember him from? I remember him from Tombstone at the beginning as the bandit.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yes, very much. That's a great button in this one.
Well, and I'm liking that you're bringing up these Westerns because, I mean, like, again, these basically all have some kind of high noon kind of mentality to them. And I think that's why they work so well. Because, like, you can watch High Noon and you can either love it or find it outdated. And it's like, but don't deny its formula that works. It's like, because we're talking Die Hard 2 and Lethal Weapon, and those kind of go in their own direction. Is like, but I think, Hills Cop and, kind of just goes from 48 Hours, which kind of goes from just classic Western folklore, which is, a bandit and a gunfighter, go after, an outlaw. It's like, that's all you need. Let the rest of the thing unfold from there, and everyone's happy, and you can characterize everyone. Someone can do an ad lib that works. Someone can do a script revision that doesn't, compromise the integrity of it all.
Yeah, I mean, it's the things about Tombstone. I mean, I could sit here all day and talk about that. But like, Michael Biehn is so friggin' awesome in that movie, and much like Aliens was brought in at the last minute to do it, and he just friggin' shows up.
And that's fine. Like Remarsh, I'm glad the way his career went. He'll always be the 48 Hours, robber to me, compared to Biehn. It's just. Sure, he was great in Terminator, but I mean, like in Aliens, like he really did own the role. I can't see any other person doing it as good at him, as much as as charismatic as Remar can be at times. It's like the dominoes fell where they did, and I wish we had similar structure to that, compared to now, where it just seems like everyone's just bidding on everything, buying stock, and I've had filmmakers on this show before, and they talk about everyone is still doing the investor game, and it's just like, stop! It doesn't work. You gotta invest your own money and then make your kind of movie, instead of do the shortcut where, well, we technically need this guy, but the studios want this kind of guy overseas, and it's like, well, then forget it. If they're wrong for the role, the movie will not work. You will not make your money back because people already don't buy it.
Right. Completely.
And we're just seeing it time and again. And I mean, it used to be very hush hush on what happened on a film set. Everyone was very professional. And now Every other movie seems to be just
everybody knows it. Man, we live in the behind the scenes, like the post behind the scenes culture now, man, because it's IMDb and extras on the VHS and DVDs and all that stuff. Like people just expect that now. That's how you follow anything, is you peel the curtain back.
Oh, totally.
And, I blame it all on the fact that Vince McMahon had to admit that wrestling was scripted in court. That's when we just pulled every curtain down in pop culture. And after that, it's all
totally.
It's all
I've been on reality shows and they're not reality. They're just you pretend to
No.
be a house bidder. I was on an episode of Cheaters, for fuck's sake. So I was just like,
I mean, everybody knows. Like and that's the thing and
you'd be surprised. I've had pals who I consider smart people.
Mhm.
And they think it's real as all get out. Oh, The Apprentice is staged? No. It's like,
dude, bro, it's all that way. It's always been that way. That's the fun
take it.
part.
Take it with a grain of salt. And yeah, like you say, this is like it is fun seeing someone act frustrated. I mean, I saw Project Greenlight and the executive going, "Oh shit," was very unconvincing. It's like, yeah, because he's not an actor. He's a
Exactly. He doesn't know what he's doing.
himself. But
Yeah.
like you say, yeah. I mean, I think everyone did get into that toxic kind of moment where it's just like, yeah, since it's all staged, I want to see people fail. So I think we do have a lot of people who, because they're so obsessed with gossip and just tabloids, they kind of feel a lot of that trolling on social media as well, to where it's just like, I mean, come on, who buys any of that? Oh, Marvel actor lets something slip. They knew exactly what they were saying. They just knew how to get away with it and not violate their NDA and get blacklisted,
Oh, completely.
So it is kind of interesting how sometimes they use that like staging to do a funding, like leaked alien art, what New Blancomp did. Deadpool, gets released, so that way it forces the studio's hand. Oh, you have to make the movie now that you've refused to make for a decade. So I think some of it has worked, but I think a lot of it is now drying up because the studios realize how embarrassing and how much PR nightmares they've had to do. I think, with digital and everything now, everyone just wants to delete any embarrassing info and just say,
Oh yeah,
I'm taking that to my grave.
Right. Yeah, they're trying to move off of it as quick as they can, but can't run away from something. So
Well, especially politically and everything. I mean, everything is now on a phone now, so it's like,
that's the thing, is that there is no privacy anymore. Everything's somebody's gonna let you know that
I don't have to record anything. I can just turn my phone on even by accident. I'm here.
And look, the smart productions lean into that, and they'll I mean, Jamie Lee Curtis, like, if you want to know what's going on in the new Halloween movies, just follow her on the gram. She will post shit every day and let you know how it's going. Here's what we're shooting. Look at this knife. Doesn't it look cool? Like, she leans into that because the producers are telling her, like, hey, we need, you're kind of the face of this. And so, the smart ones, again, let people in on it.
Well, and that was an independent franchise bought by a bigger studio. So they know that they can't look too corporate with that one versus something that's always been corporate. They're always all about.
But I mean, now, like, even the Star Wars, like, go back to even when the prequels were made, man. Like, I remember watching those web videos of like the pre-production of them making the movie and stuff, and just being blown.
Yeah, now it's second nature, but that was a big
deal. Like, that was a huge deal.
Force.net, I went through nonstop. I went to even, by the time The Hobbit came around, and they were doing that, I'm like, oh, but this is second nature. I've been seeing them do this on every, movie site.
Right, for 10 years. But George did that because he wasn't convinced people would remember Star Wars. Because at that point, it's hard to remember a time when it wasn't everywhere.
I saw people trying to shatter that interview with him. It's just like, no, for real. People, it was not played on TV all that much. It was like The Godfather, where it was once a year and you tape it or you don't,
Right, exactly. Like, if you were lucky enough to own it, then you were, I mean, that's why he put them back out in theater. All that stuff was because he needed people to get interested in it again.
He needed to convince the studios it's like that and that's another one. He owned it all and they just had distribution rights. So it's just like, okay.
Well, you watch those behind the scenes, particularly like Phantom Menace, and he's sitting there looking at the budget going, man, this better work.
It's all his money.
Company.
And he was like the most independent movie at that time for like $100 million, to where even SAG didn't want certain actors coming on there. And it's like, nowadays, with everything being so corporate, I don't think there's some independent companies like RLGE or Styx Media, which will do a lot of Heat or Training Day influence movies, like 2 of them each a year, and make decent money. and rental sales. And I think, so yeah, I think, I mean, Open Road Films is still going, and I thought it had closed up for a while, but yeah, it's got distribution deals with Lionsgate and Fox. And I think that a lot of these independent companies still are in there, still trying to squeeze in stuff. And they're clearly, some producers are looking at forums. They're seeing what people are saying, and they want to cast some of these B movie stars like has-beens like Dolph Lundgren, or new guys like, you know, Scott Adkins. And they're still, I mean, you've talked about them, so you know, but it's like, it is interesting to see which ones they will take a chance on. Like a Frank Grillo and Carl Urban are always doing some gritty movies once in a while, where they're playing a hard-boiled cop or ex-bank robber out for vengeance. And it's like, that's cool to have that alternate formula, because hopefully the studios are getting it now. It's like, for a while when Blu-ray was coming around, you know, and then got taken over by streaming, is like, it's okay to have options. So now a TV show is going to get a DVD release, and now every movie is going to get a giant expensive Blu-ray set, as well as long lost movies. And then streaming is going to always have something that none of the other platforms have. And so it's like, there is something for everyone. You don't have to do the whole, you know, out with the old, in with the new.
No, I mean, I'm thankful, you know, as a horror fan, I'm thankful that something like Shudder exists, because it's just an outlet for so much great independent horror. If you that pays homage to all the stuff you like about the genre, if you're an old fan like me or whatever, but just introduces new twists to it, and it gets a lot of creativity, and it's cool to see that kind of stuff.
I wasn't surprised when it was by AMC, because AMC was kind of the king for a while of finding long lost movies that Turner Classic Movies wasn't utilizing.
Yeah, they were the start of it. You're exactly right. So that's and it's good that there's.
Well, they own Shudder. That's the second.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, like that I wish there, and it's because they're so disparate across so many different studios and properties now. I've joked with my friends that I'm like, I wish there was an action movie Shudder. You know, like, I mean, you could.
Impact was kind of there for a bit, but it was just a satellite channel. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Sony, I mean, they got Crackle, but they got to ramp it up. But yeah, I could see even Lionsgate have Summit Interactive or something. Just do some.
Tubi has a lot of stuff on it. You know, you just got to dig for it, but it's there. I mean, it's there, but like there could be if you wanted to.
They and Plex are just channel. Well, and I mean, Pluto is basically bootleg cable.
Yeah,
people don't want to have cable, so it is interesting how we got these third parties that are booming. And you don't know if everyone, you know, even post-COVID, I mean, I think everyone wants to kind of just get by and then slowly build up to, you know, get active again. So, I mean, the next 10 years, I think, like you say, will be very interesting, because there's so many options and way more than what we used to have. And those who aren't, you know, I still encounter people who, you know, they've always had cable TV. They've never had any of the movie channels or streaming. And so, you know, if they do, it's just a brief, whatever's on Netflix. They're not going to go the extra mile and, you know, get a Prime or download something free like Tubi. And it is interesting seeing what, you know, what people do have access to. And then, yeah, like you, I've known many who is like, unless it's on streaming, not giving a minute of my time. So it is interesting how. And then there's others who, again, that they run at the existing, or shall we say, remaining video stores. So until something comes out in the street date, they're not gonna, you know, they're gonna just figure it out with their wallet and buy a giant set and own it, even if they hate it. You know, so it's we'll always have these free markets, I think, and now it's just up to, like you say, the studios to get creative and decide. But yeah, I mean, hopefully it will evolve into something neat, and instead of just, well, it was cool for 10 years, it's no longer relevant anymore. It's like, no, bullshit. Everyone always wants an older trend. Just like with movies are much like no different than fashion. There's always going to be khaki jeans or, you know, certain dresses that come back and with great appeal.
There's an audience for everything. It's just finding them. And you know, that's the thing, is the easier you make it for people to find, then there it is. Exactly. So
listen to them, please. Guys, I know you might hate the toxic internet, but look at a forum once in a while. There's going to be someone who is actually going to say a constructive remark, who isn't there just saying some baseless, you know, hackneyed insult. There's going to be someone who actually says, I think so-and-so would be wonderful for this role, and just give you a paragraph. And you may not want to make the time to read that, let alone make time for any of this shit, but you will find some legit comment for every annoying or uninspired bash, and
yeah, well, it's like anything. You have to dig through to find the gold, underneath all the mud, but it's there. You just got to be willing to mine for it.
It's a gold mine. Do it, please. Yeah. And I mean, it is kind of sad though that all these channels pretty much, especially the streaming platforms themselves, I mean, basically think that any sci-fi or horror show, like, it's going to have to be streaming only, because they've just looked at the numbers and for whatever reason, just either people aren't tuning in because they feel it'll be censored in a way, unlike it was in the 90s, or they just always put it in a terrible time slot and they wonder why. And so I'm just always just flustered when without hesitation, just ABC or NBC, and yes, even Fox will come out with something and then be so, blasphemous. Oh, I don't know why it didn't do well. I'm like, I think you should look at history. Regardless of who's in charge of programming, there's a reason certain stuff did not take off.
Completely.
Okay, well, it's been a blast here, brother. And
absolutely, man. Thanks so much for having me on again. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And anything, feel free to promote Film Strip real fast.
Oh yeah, absolutely. People can search for Film Strip Podcast wherever you find podcasts, or go to filmstrippodcast.com. That'll take you to the Anchor distribution site. You can follow the show on all the social media at Film Strip Pod, and appreciate it if you would give us a look and a listen. We appreciate all the support. We've been around a long time. We've got a huge catalog, as I've alluded to, 300 plus episodes, and we'll still keep cranking them out. And
you want a guy who strips away literally the themes as well as just material, and whether it works for today's crowd versus just being a sign of the times. This is the podcast for you.
Well, I appreciate that. I give a lot of credit to my fellow co-hosts and the wonderful guests we have on. Ron and Lindsay do a great job of being part of the Film Strip crew, and then our alums who occasionally make appearances back.
Twitter apart saying, "Hey, get on the show already."
yeah. So come on and jump in. But yeah, we are. We have a good time, and appreciate everybody giving us a listen. And thanks so much for having me on again, man. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. You know it.
We'll return after these messages.
JURS Podcast is proud to promote AutoCorrect, an independent film company with experienced industry professionals who can serve all your film industry needs. They include self-tapes, voice actor recordings, demo reel editing, script revisions, headshots, and much more. They're Actor Correct at your request. Book them on Instagram.
Hey, feeling down? Feeling low? Not enough podcasts about movies in your life? Why not try
They must be destroyed on sight.
the new Podcast Cure-All? Sure to get you right with the world and on a path to better living. We have exploitation, we have Italian horror, we have zombies, we have slashers, we have crime films, we have spaghetti westerns, we even have sci-fi and sex comedies. So take a dose of
They must be destroyed on sight.
as needed, and let the hosts, Lee Russell, Daniel Harper, Paul Romali, and the odd guest host cure what ails you.
Warning, may cause atrophy, African consumption, black fever, bone shave, chin cough, colic, cramp colic, dropsy of the brain, elephantitis, grocer's itch, jaundice, mania, miasma, mortification, palsy, Pott's disease, rheumatism, scurvy, St. Anthony's fire, summer complaint, and worm fit in some people. Consult a physician before listening.
Did you ever see a film at such a young age it left you traumatized with cinematic wounds? Necrophilia. It's a dead issue, man. Don't push it. Cinema Psyops is a weekly podcast documenting an ongoing experiment on the mind of an unwilling test subject.
No one should have to watch this movie.
Oh, no one should have to watch this?
No one should have to watch this movie.
Surprisingly, it's not a topic that a lot of people really want to tackle.
I'm shocked, prudes.
I know, really.
Right?
It's the next sexual frontier that no one wants to explore.
I am in the most sincerest of senses, disappointed in you.
It takes a powerful goddess like Connie, jam her arm down the monster's throat and kill it. Oh, I'm still tripping out over that. Even as a kid, I was like, I gotta find a girl like that. Every week, I get a new look of disappointment that I never thought I could get out of her.
Unimaginable. At 12 years old, you should not be watching this movie.
Obviously.
At 13, you should not be. 14, you shouldn't be. I'm not entirely sure even 17-year-olds should be watching this.
Just because you're offended by something doesn't mean that you have the right to demand that it doesn't exist. Watching this film again, I had all of this like little nerd glee with everything that kept
little
popping
history
up.
doll popping up
absolutely.
at you.
So I totally loved this film.
Hey, I know why you couldn't see that. It's because your brain's warped from watching this shit at 12 years old.
Yeah, this is a rough movie. I told you ahead of time when we were getting ready to do it that it was going to be a rough
How could you watch
one.
this shit at 12?
Because physical wounds heal, cinematic ones don't. Listen to Cinema Psyops.
Hey everybody, I'm Corey.
And I'm Zach, and we're the hosts of Podcasting After Dark, a cast dedicated to late-night horror and sci-fi of the 80s and 90s, often found on HBO and Cinemax.
You know, the movies your parents didn't want you watching as a kid. You can find us every other week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher.
This is what you want.
This is what you get.
Greetings, friends. My name is Dean Legero, and I'm the host of the 3324 podcast. I invite you to join me and my lifelong friend Eric Kuber to come with us as we discuss the music and movies that shaped our life. Each week, we'll pick an album or film that we really connect to, and not only give you some great info and trivia, but also discuss, debate, and celebrate what it means to us and the journey it took us on. We also look forward to hearing from you and giving us some of your picks for us to check out and discuss. I think it'll be a really fun experience, so come along with us for the ride. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider and at 3324.buzzsprout.com. Thanks for your time, and welcome to the 3324 family.
It's time, let's check our cue, baby. Pair it with a couple brews, baby. We love good movies. We love the bad ones too. So we watch them all and pass their lessons on to you. Oh yeah. Everything I learned from movies helps to make life a little bit groovy. Whether one last plot holes or gratuitous movies, it's time to get busy with your friend Steve and Izzy at eilfm.podbean.com.
We now continue with our program.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up